Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a great tree rooted deep in ancient soil, yet growing tall toward the sky. The soil beneath it is rich with tradition. The air around it is filled with the winds of change. But every so often, a storm arrives, not to nurture, but to break. In today's world, the battlefield is no longer one of swords and shields. It is not fought on land or sea. It is fought through economics, technology, and influence. And so we must ask ourselves, why does one powerful nation with all its strength feel threatened by the rise of another? Why does the United States, time and time again, place bans, restrictions, and obstacles in front of Indian innovation? This is not just a matter of policy. This is a reflection of fear, of competition, of global shifting power. India is not just a country, it is an idea, a force, a wave that rises not with aggression, but with intellect, creativity, and resilience. Today, I will guide you through this story, a story not of blame, but of understanding, not of anger, but of awareness, because when we become aware of how power moves, we learn how to rise even in the face of resistance. The United States has long positioned itself as the global leader in technological innovation and digital dominance. For decades, American tech giants like Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon have held the lion's share of the world's data, digital services, and cloud infrastructure. This supremacy has allowed the U.S. to not only control large parts of the global economy, but also influence the digital behavior of billions of people across the planet. However, the emergence of Indian tech companies has begun to shift that dynamic in significant ways. With massive domestic demand, a highly skilled workforce, and government-backed initiatives like Digital India and Make in India, India is no longer content being a service provider for the West. It is becoming a competitor. Indian firms are expanding rapidly across sectors like fintech, telecommunications, e-commerce, and artificial intelligence. Companies such as Jio, Paytm, Bharat P, TCS, Infosys, and even newer startups have begun to challenge Western counterparts in terms of both innovation and scale. Jio, for example, transformed India's digital ecosystem in just a few years by offering affordable internet access to millions, thereby increasing the number of internet users in India by hundreds of millions. With that user base, Indian companies are now collecting vast amounts of consumer data, building powerful algorithms, and customizing digital ecosystems tailored for local needs, something Western firms have struggled to do effectively. This transformation has made India not just a technology consumer, but a global technology producer. As Indian companies develop their own alternatives to U.S.-dominated platforms, they begin to chip away at the market share and influence of American firms. This is not just about profits, it's about power, the ability to set standards, to influence digital behavior, to shape how data is collected, stored, and utilized globally. That is the core of modern geopolitical power. The U.S. views this shift not just as competition, but as a strategic threat. Moreover, India's move toward technological independence threatens the Western model of digital dependency. American firms have historically used their platforms to gain access to international markets, often using that influence to push American values, business models, and even political ideals. If Indian companies continue to grow unchecked, and if more countries begin adopting Indian platforms and digital standards, this could lead to a multipolar digital world, one where the U.S. no longer calls all the shots. That is a profound change in the international order, and it's not one the United States will accept easily. To counter this, the U.S. has increasingly started to use soft power and regulatory tools to slow down the momentum of Indian firms. Bans, trade restrictions, visa hurdles for IT professionals, and security investigations into Indian apps and platforms are all part of a broader strategy. While often framed as issues of data privacy or national security, many of these moves are, at their core, attempts to protect American tech dominance from a rapidly rising alternative. The narrative of security risk often serves as a diplomatic cover for what is essentially economic warfare in the digital age. This is especially true when Indian companies begin to show interest in expanding into global markets. Whether it's competing with American cloud service providers, offering fintech solutions in Africa, or developing homegrown alternatives to platforms like WhatsApp or Google Pay, every move India makes toward self-sufficiency and exportability is seen as a potential challenge to U.S. interests. The bans and restrictions are not just reactive measures, they are proactive efforts to maintain dominance. The rise of Indian tech is not just about business, it's a symbol of a broader shift in global influence. For the U.S., losing technological dominance would mean losing the ability to shape the future, and that is a threat no superpower takes lightly. Data has become one of the most valuable resources in the modern world, often compared to oil in its power to shape economies, politics, and security. With the rapid digitization of societies, control over data translates directly into influence over populations, markets, and even national policies. For the United States, which has traditionally dominated the digital landscape through its global tech giants, access to and control over data has been a strategic asset. However, the rise of Indian companies collecting, processing, and storing data independently within India has raised significant concerns in Washington. These concerns are often framed under the umbrella of national security, but at their core, they reflect a deeper anxiety about losing control over the global flow of information. Indian tech firms, particularly in sectors like telecom, e-commerce, fintech, and edtech, are generating and managing massive volumes of user data. As India pushes forward with its data localization policies, mandating that data generated within India be stored and processed on Indian soil, this directly challenges the global business models of American companies, which rely on unrestricted data movement and centralized cloud infrastructure. The Indian government's push for digital sovereignty means that foreign companies, including those from the U.S., face increasing scrutiny and tighter regulations when operating in the Indian digital space. This shift threatens the long-standing dominance that American firms have enjoyed not only in India, but in many other parts of the world. From a U.S. perspective, Indian companies becoming custodians of their own citizens' data and potentially data from other countries as they expand poses a dual threat. First, it limits the intelligence and business insights that U.S. firms and agencies can extract from the Indian market. Second, it sets a precedent that other emerging economies might follow, leading to a fragmented internet landscape where local control outweighs global access. This would severely limit the reach and influence of U.S.-based companies, both commercially and geopolitically. In addition, Indian companies working in critical sectors like telecommunications and digital payments are increasingly seen as national security players. These sectors directly interface with sensitive information such as financial transactions, communication patterns, and even biometric data. If Indian firms control these pipelines, it naturally reduces the dependence on American infrastructure, such as Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, or even Microsoft's Azure. The U.S. fears that such independence could allow India not only to protect its own data, but also to leverage it strategically in regional and global affairs. Security concerns are often cited as the reason behind U.S. resistance to Indian digital growth, but these are sometimes selective and politically motivated. For example, when Indian companies try to acquire assets or expand services in the West, especially in the fields of AI, cybersecurity, or cloud storage, they are often subjected to intense regulatory scrutiny, even without clear evidence of wrongdoing. This selective scrutiny creates barriers that are difficult to overcome, effectively preventing Indian firms from gaining a strong foothold in Western markets. The narrative of protecting national interests masks what is often a deeper fear of data-driven influence slipping out of Western hands. Furthermore, as India deepens its digital cooperation with other countries, particularly in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, it becomes a new node in the global data network. Indian platforms and services are increasingly preferred due to affordability, cultural proximity, and shared developmental goals. This trend makes India a growing hub of influence that operates independently of American platforms. The more countries begin trusting India with their data, the less relevant the American digital empire becomes in those regions. For the U.S., this represents not just an economic loss, but a geopolitical one. Ultimately, the issue is not just about data protection or consumer privacy. It is about who holds the keys to the digital world. The rise of Indian companies in this domain signals a redistribution of power, one that could define the balance of global influence in the 21st century. Economic protectionism is a strategy often employed by powerful nations to shield their domestic industries from foreign competition, and the United States has been no stranger to this approach. While publicly advocating for free markets and open competition, the U.S. has frequently used subtle and not-so-subtle tools to protect its own economic interests when it perceives a rising threat. In the case of Indian companies, especially those operating in critical sectors such as technology, pharmaceuticals, digital payments, and infrastructure, this protectionist mindset has become increasingly visible. The U.S. government, often under the guise of regulatory compliance, national security concerns, or legal challenges, imposes barriers that make it difficult for Indian firms to compete fairly in American or global markets. One of the key drivers behind this protectionist stance is the fear of losing control over key industries that are central to the modern economy. Indian companies are no longer just service providers or outsourcing hubs. They are becoming creators of proprietary technology, builders of global platforms, and exporters of innovation. From IT giants like Infosys and TCS to new-age disruptors like Zomato, Ola, Byju's, and UPA-based platforms, Indian firms are making significant strides in capturing market share, building global brands, and reshaping industries. This rising momentum is seen as a threat to U.S.-based competitors who have long operated with minimal global competition, especially from countries like India. Trade policies and tariffs are one of the most commonly used tools in the arsenal of economic protectionism. The U.S. has selectively imposed import restrictions, tightened visa policies for Indian IT professionals, and raised concerns over intellectual property rights and compliance standards. These moves, while presented as legal or administrative necessities, often disproportionately affect Indian firms and limit their ability to operate in or export to the U.S. market. Such actions serve to preserve the advantage enjoyed by American firms by preventing true competition from emerging markets. When Indian companies seek to expand their operations abroad, particularly in the U.S., they often face roadblocks that delay or even halt their growth. Another example of economic protectionism is seen in the lobbying power of American corporations. Major U.S. tech companies exert significant influence over policymakers, and they often lobby to create an unfavorable environment for foreign competitors. When Indian companies begin to rise in visibility or threaten to undercut U.S. firms on cost or innovation, these domestic giants can pressure lawmakers to impose restrictions or investigations under the pretense of consumer protection or national interest. This manipulation of regulatory mechanisms allows the U.S. to maintain economic dominance while presenting a facade of fair play. The U.S. also leverages its soft power through international institutions and standards-setting bodies. Indian companies seeking global certifications or compliance for exports often face bureaucratic hurdles and disproportionately rigorous standards. In many cases, these requirements serve to protect U.S. companies by raising the entry barriers for Indian firms trying to compete on a global scale. Whether it's pharmaceuticals, software solutions, or fintech products, Indian offerings are often held to a higher or selectively enforced benchmark, which delays market entry and inflates costs for Indian firms. Despite global calls for collaboration and fairness, the underlying reality remains that economic self-interest often guides policy decisions. The U.S. is highly protective of its leadership in innovation, and when it sees Indian companies gaining ground, especially in high-growth, high-value sectors, it responds by tightening access, increasing scrutiny, and creating friction through legal, trade, and financial instruments. Indian success stories abroad are often short-lived not due to lack of capability, but because of these structural imbalances baked into international trade systems led by Western powers. While the narrative may emphasize national interest, economic safety, or rule of law compliance, the underlying motive is often simple: preserving dominance. The United States views the ascent of Indian businesses not as healthy competition, but as a disruption to the existing order, a disruption it is determined to slow down by any means necessary. Geopolitical tensions have always played a significant role in shaping international trade, technology alliances, and diplomatic relations. In the case of Indian companies facing increasing bans and restrictions from the United States, these tensions cannot be separated from the broader strategic picture. The U.S. and India, while officially presenting themselves as partners in various sectors like defense, climate change, and technology, are also quietly navigating a competitive and, at times, conflicting landscape of global influence. As India rises as a regional and increasingly global power, its growing independence and assertiveness are challenging the long-standing geopolitical dominance of Western powers, particularly the United States. The global order that emerged after World War II was built largely under American leadership, with the U.S. controlling key institutions, trade systems, and technological standards. However, the 21st century is witnessing a shift in power from the West to the East. India's geographic location, its massive market, demographic dividend, and strategic autonomy are positioning it as a key player in this new multipolar world. This rise is not only economic but also ideological. India is forging its own path, often diverging from Western frameworks and asserting its national interest more strongly on global platforms. This independent stance doesn't always align with U.S. interests and often creates friction beneath the surface of diplomatic smiles and handshakes. The Indo-U.S. relationship, while friendly on the surface, is often tested by differing positions on global conflicts, trade policies, and military alliances. India's neutral stance on contentious global issues, such as its historical non-alignment, its relations with Russia, or its resistance to joining Western sanctions, does not sit well with American foreign policy strategists. When India chooses to engage with powers that the U.S. considers rivals or threats, such as Russia or Iran, it complicates bilateral ties. These geopolitical misalignments often find indirect expression in the economic realm, where Indian companies suddenly face barriers, scrutiny, or even bans under various pretenses. Technology is increasingly viewed through the lens of national security and geopolitical control. American leadership understands that technological dominance is central to maintaining influence in a digitized world. As Indian companies develop their own tech ecosystems, from payment infrastructure and space technologies to artificial intelligence and defense manufacturing, their growing self-reliance reduces the influence of U.S. companies and government-backed projects in the region. This shift can destabilize the strategic balance the U.S. seeks to maintain, especially in Asia, where China is already challenging American power. If India, the world's largest democracy and a rising tech power, also reduces dependence on the U.S., the geopolitical leverage of America weakens significantly. The U.S. also perceives the growing collaboration between Indian firms and non-Western allies as a long-term challenge. When Indian companies expand their digital, financial, or infrastructure services to regions like Africa, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, they create parallel systems to those dominated by U.S. firms. This allows countries in the global South to bypass traditional Western-dominated channels, which the U.S. sees as a threat to its global influence. In such cases, restricting the growth and expansion of Indian firms becomes a strategic move to slow down the formation of alternative power centers. Even defense and cybersecurity are deeply tied to the fate of Indian companies. As Indian startups and public sector undertakings innovate in defense tech, satellite communication, and cybersecurity tools, their rising stature makes the U.S. cautious. The fear is not only of losing a market, but of seeing India become a major arms and defense technology exporter, shifting the balance of power in sensitive geopolitical zones. Banning or restricting these companies under the claim of security risks or non-compliance becomes a way to limit this progression without triggering diplomatic confrontations. These actions may not always be overt, but they reflect a clear pattern. Behind the policy papers and strategic dialogues lies a growing unease. The United States, while acknowledging India's rise, also seeks to manage and contain it in ways that serve its own long-term strategic interests. India's transformation from a developing economy into a rising global tech powerhouse has not gone unnoticed. What was once seen as a back-office outsourcing destination is now leading in key areas of innovation, including digital finance, e-governance, mobile technology, pharmaceuticals, space tech, and artificial intelligence. The rapid pace at which India is developing indigenous technology, solutions, and building scalable platforms has begun to alter the global perception of its capabilities. This shift from service provider to innovator has placed Indian companies on the radar of global competitors, particularly the United States, which has dominated the tech space for decades. As India becomes more self-reliant and begins to export its digital infrastructure, services, and innovations to other countries, the challenge it poses to the established U.S. technological order becomes more immediate and direct. One of the most defining aspects of India's rise is the scale and cost efficiency of its solutions. Systems like UPI, Unified Payments Interface, have revolutionized financial transactions in a country of over 1 billion people, offering instant, secure, and free digital payments at a level of scale unmatched anywhere in the world. Other countries, particularly in Asia and Africa, have started looking to replicate India's public digital infrastructure model. The possibility that India could become a technology provider to the global South, bypassing American financial and tech platforms, is a significant concern for the U.S., which views such growth not merely as competition, but as a shift in influence. Indian startups are no longer just competing domestically. They are going global. From SaaS companies entering the U.S. and European markets to Indian edtech and fintech firms serving global users, this outward momentum represents a new phase in India's tech evolution. The more Indian firms grow internationally, the more they begin to erode the dominance of American companies in sectors where they once had no serious challengers. This is particularly threatening to U.S. firms that have grown used to near monopolistic control in developing markets. The fear is not only about market share, but about the intellectual influence these firms carry with them, reshaping consumer habits, setting industry standards, and even influencing regulatory norms abroad. Another key factor driving India's rapid rise is its emphasis on building homegrown alternatives to global platforms. Whether it's replacing foreign social media apps with domestic versions, investing in semiconductor manufacturing, or developing its own AI language models, India is deliberately reducing dependency on foreign technology. The government's push for Atmanirbhar Bharat at self-reliant India is not just a slogan. It is a multi-layered policy framework supported by funding, education, and public-private partnerships. The success of this model threatens the historical dependence that many countries, including India, had on Western technology and platforms. This new wave of Indian innovation is also highly aligned with national priorities. Indian companies are solving real, large-scale problems with digital-first solutions that are often more inclusive, cost-effective, and scalable than Western models. From telemedicine to agricultural tech, from logistics platforms to public service delivery tools, Indian innovations are finding resonance in countries facing similar challenges. These developments shift the focus of technological thought leadership from Silicon Valley to cities like Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and Pune. The more the world looks to India for ideas and implementation, the more the U.S. sees its role diminishing in the global tech conversation. The U.S. response to this rise often takes the form of regulatory pushback. Whether through sudden bans, tightened trade restrictions, data scrutiny, or investment barriers, Indian firms are increasingly being targeted under the pretext of compliance, security, or standards. But the underlying reason is the recognition that India is no longer just a rising power, it is a redefining one. Its ability to innovate for scale, lead with inclusivity, and export its technology playbook is seen as a realignment of influence in a world once dominated by Western frameworks. The U.S., recognizing this shift, seeks to slow it down, not necessarily through direct confrontation, but through selective resistance that keeps the balance tilted in its favor.